The problem is they don't pass the ball. The Eagles rank last in drop back rate over expected.
Dolphins offense as a whole just been on fire ever since Tua came back. We're talking about third in passing yards per game, first in the EPA per drop back, and fifth in offensive points per game.
He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in 4 games, but the yardage has been there. He's still averaging 267 yards per game.
Kyler Murray can win your week, and I want week winners in the playoffs, Dwain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 15 Fantasy Life Rankings Show. I'm Matthew Freedman, Matt at the Oracle, and I'm here with Ian Hartitz and Dwain McFarland. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the risers, the fallers, the sicko starts, and our ranking divergences. Ian, is it in fact a great day to be great?
That's what I've heard, Freeman. Let's face it, man, nothing better in life than having a first-round bye in your fantasy playoffs. So blessed enough to have a few, because guess what, guys? If you fail in one fantasy league, join more, and hopefully you win those.
Absolutely. So that's fantasy. In reality, the Cowboys on Monday Night Football were absolutely terrible. Dwain, have you recovered from that?
Yeah, I mean, come on. We've talked about this, Freedman. We don't need recovery anymore. Like, we're so scarred. There's so much scar tissue with the Cowboys. Like, we're over it. Like the overshown injury, that one hurt because that lingers into next year. He honestly was the best player, on their defense this season, besides Micah Parsons, is obviously, but like he was the guy that kind of took that big step forward that gave you, just that little glimmer of hope of saying, okay, we can build around that. Now we may not have overshown for next season. So that part hurt me the most. The Cowboys, they're going to cowboy. I honestly thought the Bengals would beat them by more, Freedman.
Yeah, my soul is still numb, but we move on from Monday Night Football to Thursday Night Football. The big news item that we have, ESPN's Adam Schefter has reported that 49ers rookie third-stringer turned starting running back Isaac Guerendo plans to play, even though he missed most of this past week with a sprained foot. So Guerendo says he, quote, feels good. The question is, how high are we ranking him? Ian, going to kick it to you first. I mean, a lot of uncertainty with Guerendo. It seems like almost any back can step into that backfield and be productive. Even though Guerendo is playing, that doesn't mean they're going to give him the full workload. Where are you ranking him?
Dwayne and I were talking about this on Sunday night, and I kind of brought up the Trey Sermon line because there is a point, Freedman, we've seen in San Francisco where, no, we will not see Shanahan actually give that full fantasy-friendly RB1 workload. But guess what? Guerendo is on the right side of that, and we saw it last week, especially in the pass game, man. I know he only had 2 catches, but really is explosive in the screen game, and accordingly, ripped the Bears' heart out for the majority of that afternoon. So, guys, it is an injury where we've actually kind of been surprised at, I guess, how lackluster it has been. It doesn't seem that severe. The guy's about to play on a short week. So I'm trying to be out in front of this. I actually have Guerendo now in my ranks that you guys can all find at fantasylife.com. RB22. Dwayne, you're sitting there RB27, and I'm just wondering, man, why so scared?
Well, it's like Freedman said. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty with it, and I haven't updated my ranks this morning, for any injury news. So, yeah, waking up and seeing that this is we're probably going to have him play. So, I mean, that's a positive. But still, at the same time, am I going to start him over Rachaad White, who might be without Bucky Irving? I'm probably starting Rachaad White.
No Bucky.
I'll take the risk. With Bucky Irving, and if he plays, Rachaad White's still been viable. So, I mean, and here's the thing: the ceiling for Isaac Guerendo, we know, is it's big. We just saw it last weekend, but he's playing hurt. And last weekend, he did split the backfield. Like he only missed the final 2 drives of the game due to the injury, and really it was a drive and a half. So his utilization numbers were not that impacted by it. I mean, he wasn't even at 50% of the rushing attempts. You did mention that he was involved in the passing game, and he was. He had a 53% route participation. So, I mean, he's getting like half the work, but he's definitely not getting the Jordan Mason workload from early in the year. He's not getting that workload that we saw, obviously, from Christian McCaffrey. So already a guy that they were probably going to give half the snaps, let the other guys battle it out for the other half. So he's probably going to get less than that. You got a chance of re-injury. I do think the enticing part here is, the Rams, it's a great matchup. If you look at just over the last 4 games alone, just on the ground, they've given up 26.1 fantasy points per game to opposing offenses. That's a 4.2 fantasy point boost, which is one of the better marks over the last 4 games. So the matchup's definitely there. I definitely see the upside. I would just say it comes down to your matchup. Like, do you need the floor more or do you need the ceiling more? It is the playoffs. you might more likely need the ceiling. You've gotten rid of all the bad teams in your league, unless you get to play that one dude that happened to make it in, with a winning record, even though, he scored like the 10th most points. Then maybe you can use the floor play. But I think he's a borderline running back too.
All right, so moving on from Guerendo to the rest of the news items of the week. Derek Carr, concussion, hand injury. The Saints have not yet ruled him out for Week 15. Still, I'd be surprised if he played. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler thinks that Jake Haener and not Spencer Rattler will be the starter. Tommy DeVito is starting in Week 15 against the Ravens. Drew Lock is in a walking boot, so the threat of DeVito getting benched might be minimized. A sad day in the Hartitz household indeed. Aiden O'Connell suffered a bone bruise in Week 14. The coaching staff said Desmond Ridder would start this week, but then O'Connell participated in the Wednesday walkthrough, and now he does have a chance to start on Monday against the Falcons. At running back, guys who did not practice on Wednesday, Kenneth Walker III, he was out last week, so not looking good for him. The same for Bucky Irvin, dealing with a hip and back injury, exited last week, trending not towards playing this week, given the DNP on Wednesday. Tony Pollard missed practice with an ankle issue. He has looked great the past couple of weeks. We should monitor. And then Alvin Kamara out with an illness. He should be fine. Alexander Madison dealing with the ankle injury. Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce tentatively expects him to return for Week 15, but he also said Sincere McCormick would remain the lead back. And then Breece Hall missed last week with the knee injury, is, quote, struggling a bit. According to Jets interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich, he missed last week. Wouldn't be a surprise if the Jets shut him down for the season. At wide receiver, guys who did practice on Wednesday. Josh Downs missed 2 weeks ago with a shoulder injury, seems to be healthier coming out of the bye. Keon Coleman practiced in full. He's missed since Week 10 with the wrist injury, but finally is on track to play. Romeo Doubs and Cedric Tillman both out the past couple of weeks with concussions, still in the protocol, but trending towards playing. Malik Neighbors and CeeDee Lamb both practice on a limited basis, monitor, but I would expect them to play. Rashad Bateman practiced in full. Jalen Carter practiced in full, so both are on track to return after missing time. DK Metcalf practiced in full, listed with a shoulder injury, but given that he practiced in full to start the week, it looks like he's getting healthier, and we will talk about him more at the end of the show. That is what we call a tease in the business. Ladd McConkey, knee, shoulder injuries, practiced limited to open the week, but I would say monitor. He practiced every day last week, also limitedly before sitting, so just need to be sure to check him. Mike Evans did not practice on Wednesday, hamstring, probably maintenance. George Pickens also did not practice on Wednesday, not a good sign for him after missing last week. And then Chris Olave, who's been on IR with concussion, unlikely to return from IR this week per Saints interim head coach Darren Rizzi. And then finally at the tight end position, guys who did not practice on Wednesday, David Njoku dealing with the hamstring injury that he tweaked the hamstring last week. Need to monitor that. Evan Ingram with the shoulder injury. Need to monitor that. Guys who did practice, Dalton Kincaid practiced in full. Great news. He's been out for a few weeks. He's trending towards playing on a Sunday. And then Trey McBride and Juwan Johnson both practiced on a limited basis. I'd say monitor, but we would expect them to play. All right. That is the rapid news. Let's get into the rankings right after we talk about our friends at Game Time. Dwayne and Ian, we all know that there's nothing like being at a game in person. And if there's one NFL game I wish I could attend this week, it would be Bills at Lions. That could be the game of the year. And of course, Game Time is my go-to for finding amazing tickets for all kinds of events, not just sports. And I was scrolling through the Game Time app and I came across this new feature, Game Time Picks, a total game changer. It curates your experience so you can see the best deals on great seats. And Game Time Picks makes finding tickets so easy. Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, let's get into our QB rankings, of course, presented by our friends at DraftKings. At number 1, we have Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, number 2, Jaden Daniels, number 3, coming off of bye, Joe Burrow at number 4, Jalen Hurts, number 5, Sam Darnold at number 6, and then rounding out the top 12, we have Tua, Brock Purdy, Kyler Murray, Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield, and then Jared Goff. All right, let's start at the guy who is number 6 in our rankings, our QB riser, Sam Darnold, playing the Bears this week. Dwayne, He is one of the guys that is rising up the ranks for you, and we all have him universally at number 6. What is it that you like about him this week?
Well, he's been a guy that we've talked about several times on the show. I feel like it was something that, probably 7-8 weeks ago was more surprising for people. They're like, wow, these guys have Sam Darnold inside the top 10. People got a little bit more used to it. But I think the big thing for me with Darnold is, we knew he was going to have that little soft stretch of a schedule coming out of his bye week. He did pretty good in those games. But man, he's really elevated his play against some of the better defenses. And that's what I've really liked to see. If you look at him over the last 4 games, 25.2 fantasy points per game. Since discovering his wide receiver 2, Jordan Addison, is also a pretty good target to look at along with Mr. Jordan Addison. We also got TJ Hawkinson getting more healthy last week, even though we had Josh Oliver back. He had an 83% route participation. So we've got all the weapons. But over these last 4 games, man, it's just hard to argue with what we've gotten from Darnold. QB7, QB6, QB13, QB2. We've got an offense we like with Kevin O'Connell. They've got the weapons to throw to we've already discussed. So then you look at this matchup. The Bears, they were pretty tough early in the year. Like, you didn't really want to be facing that Bears secondary. But if we look at the last 4 games, they're giving up 18 fantasy points per game just through the air, which is where Darnold does most of his damage. Yeah, he scrambles a little bit more than people realize, but still most of his points are coming through the air. And they've allowed a 1.5 point fantasy point boost just through the air to opposing quarterbacks over the last 4 games. So not quite as stout of a defense. I don't know if it's something to do with maybe their season isn't going quite the way that they thought it was supposed to go, or if it's something to do, just with the scheme and something that other teams have discovered. But the Bears, just not as good as they were early in the year. So that moves this to really more of like a neutral matchup. And honestly, Darnold has enough weapons that he can really carve up pretty much any defense, because if they take away one guy, he's still got another 2. If they take away 2, he's still got a third guy that he can go to. So just hard to keep him outside of like a mid-range QB1, and I've got him at QB7 this week.
Ian, I want your thoughts on this. So Sam Darnold, number 6 in the MVP odds, if you look at our futures page at Fantasy Life. I mean, having an amazing season on a 1-year deal. And so there are questions as to what his future is going to be and how much of what we're seeing out of him right now is due to natural maturation and just not being in a total dumpster fire of an environment, or how much of it is due to the great circumstances around him, including head coach, including all of the playmakers that Dwain just mentioned. How much of this is Darnold really taking a step forward and representative of who he is in the future? And how much of this is Sam Darnold is just in a really great situation?
Going to go with yes there, Freedman, to answer your question. I do believe it is a, glorious mixture of all of these factors. I just can't believe these are actually the heights, okay? I mean, I think we all could have, if we had to sit back and wrap our minds around Darnold, having a bit of a bounce back year, okay, fine. We've seen Geno Smith do that, okay? That was a common comp for it. But literally, guys, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow. Those are the only quarterbacks who are playing ahead of him this week. Freedman, you just told us he's 6th in the MVP race. Absolutely incredible season. So I do think Kevin O'Connell was playing to his strengths, and we can probably only also need one hand to rank the number of skill position rooms that we would prefer over Minnesota. But hey, whoever is winning out, man, it has been glorious, and Darnold obviously is absolutely cooking. So do want to shout out that downfield passing attack, because I do think that is the part of Darnold's game that has been on display the most over the years, and they are really tapping into that. Vikings lead the league in terms of passing yards and touchdowns on passes thrown 20-plus yards downfield. And guys, some of the other stuff isn't even close. We're talking about a 55% deep ball completion rate. No other offense is over 45%. 20 yards per attempt. Nobody else is even at 17. So Darnold, Jettas, Addison, they are all cooking Freedman. And somehow Darnold is a must start in the fantasy playoffs. What a time to be alive.
All right. With every riser, there must be a faller this week. That guy is Russell Wilson, who has looked good to this point in the year, but of course has a tough matchup going against the Eagles. And accordingly, we have all downgraded him in our rankings. Dwain, what is it that stands out to you with this matchup this week?
Yeah, and for Wilson, he's a guy that more often than not, like over the last month or two, he's been a guy that we've talked about as a riser, but we just have, multiple things that are kind of going against him this week. One of those things you mentioned to start off the show, Freedman, and that's the fact that George Pickens did not practice again yesterday, and he's really the straw that stirs the drink when we talk about that passing game for the Steelers. Everyone else is really a complementary piece. Freiermuth is not going to make you big plays. Calvin Austin will make you big plays, but he can't come up with just the common first down catches you need. Van Jefferson, Wilson, he's basically invisible. Mike Williams can't really get a full-time playing role. We've got Scotty Miller running routes out here. So it's just a situation where we don't have anyone else they can truly lean into. And that's a major factor. The other part is we've got a tough matchup here against the Eagles. The Eagles are the number one defense against opposing quarterbacks, keeping them to 2.9 points below their average. You guys can see that there with the quarterback fantasy boost. Actually, the second lowest. Sorry, the Dolphins actually moved into first to the hardest matchup after this last weekend. So the Eagles, just a tough matchup. We don't have George Pickens. And then you just have the team total. Vegas tends to agree. The odds makers are on this already. Freedman, 19 points. That's the fifth lowest total on the slate. So not expecting a lot of touchdowns because of the things we already talked about. Not going to have Pickens, not going to have the matchup that we want. So you just have to move him down. So I've got Wilson really as honestly, he's in that low end quarterback 2 status. There are a lot of quarterbacks you're starting over Russell Wilson this week. In fact, you might not even be starting him in a super flex league.
And I would say the Hall of Fame case for Russell Wilson definitely took a hit in the past couple of years, but it feels like now in this new situation, he's starting to look a little bit like, I wouldn't say the Seattle version of Russ Wilson, but maybe a guy who is at least competent and could play at this level and hold this job for the next couple of years. What are your long-term big picture thoughts on Russell Wilson?
He's doing everything right, and I would be surprised at this point if he's not back under center in week 1 of 2025. I mean, I can't believe some people thought Justin Fields was the answer here. I definitely didn't scream that, for 6 weeks this year or anything like that. So please don't check the film, everyone. But yeah, with Russ, I mean, I will say, as much as he is playing great in real life, we have seen the difference in pass volume and honestly rushing floor. I mean, 22 yards per game on the ground last year, just 6 this year. He hasn't been this super fantasy friendly quarterback this time around. Guys, last year he averaged 17.1 fantasy points per game while getting benched on a bad Broncos team. This year he's averaging 17.1 fantasy points per game as the leader of a Steelers team. So again, one of these things where I'm with Dwain. Don't think we can rank him too highly, but just in terms of what he's done running this Arthur Smith-led offense, someone who also deserves, a ton of apologies throughout the fantasy community. Can't say enough good things there, but sadly running into the juggernaut defense that is the Eagles, man, where since they've returned from that week 5 bye, fewest passing yards in the league allowed and tied for the fewest passing touchdowns allowed. So love everything Russ has done in Pittsburgh. Go ahead and get him, a nice little short 2-3 year contract, see what he can do these next few years. But this week in fantasy, find someone else.
All right. Speaking of someone else, that might be Kirk Cousins. And I would say it makes my stomach feel a little bit sick, but that's where we are. This is one of our sicko starts for the week. Dwain, Kirk Cousins going against the Raiders on Monday. What are your thoughts with him? What is it that makes you think, yes, this is finally the week that I want Kirk Cousins in my lineup?
I debated getting rid of sicko starts because I feel like your fantasy playoffs have started. And so you really shouldn't be faced with these sort of decisions. But then I thought, some leagues put more teams in the playoffs. Some leagues play with super deep benches, all these sort of things. You might be in a super flex, that. So I kept it. I kept it around. And with Kirk Cousins, I'm with you, Freeman. It made me feel really queasy to write this name down. And it's also tougher because when you go over to Yahoo and you look at the number of teams starting these players, which is how I typically, kind of figure out, okay, can I use them as a sicko start or not? They've got to be below 30%. Well, everyone just, you got, 2/3 of your league just leaving their lineup the same as it was last week because their season's over. So I can't really use that data anymore. So I just kind of have to pick guys that honestly just make me feel uneasy. And that was the barometer I used. And I landed on a Kirk Cousins name. I nearly went with Aaron Rodgers, but I felt so much better about Aaron Rodgers. I felt like, hey, after the good game, he's got the 2 pass catchers. People would probably be a lot more willing to use Aaron Rodgers than Kirk Cousins, and rightfully so. But just hear me out. This is a numbers game that we're playing, right? Kirk Cousins does not look good. If you've been watching him play football, you're going to think, man, Dwayne's a complete moron. And that still may be true. But the passing yards have, thanks, Hartitz. The passing yards have been there. Look, he hasn't had a relevant fantasy finish since week 9 when he was the QB 11. So it's been really rough. He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in 4 games. But the yardage has been there. He's still averaging 267 yards per game over that stretch. He's had 1 dud from a passing yardage standpoint. And Freedman, you've studied this stuff. What's one of the strongest correlating things to passing touchdowns? It's getting the yards. So this isn't sustainable. He's not going to keep not throwing any touchdowns. I'm not saying he's going to come out and throw 4, But with how he's performing, he could throw 2. And if he throws for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, you're going to feel pretty good about him, especially in a super flex league. If you look at the Falcons, they're 5-point favorites. They got a healthy team total, 24.8. They're playing against the Raiders, who, if you look over the last 4 games, giving up 20.1 fantasy points per game just through the air. How does Kirk Cousins do all of his damage? Just through the air. So that's a really good thing for him. They've given a 4.7 fantasy point boost over the last 4 games to opposing passers, again, just through the air. If you look at their boost overall in the season, which also includes rushing and all those other things, it's the 26th matchup, plus 2.6. So that's actually 26 being a good thing in that category, right? A number 1 would mean it's a really hard matchup. So good matchup, good team total. The yards have been there, just not the touchdowns. He's a sicko start. So, yeah, I would use him. I'll tell you this. I'd start him over Russell Wilson this weekend. I think there's more upside with Kirk Cousins than there is with Russ Wilson, and I think their floors are really similar.
All right, we've spent enough time talking about Kirk Cousins. Let's get on to the running backs. But first, a word from our friends at DraftKings. Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football and get even closer to the action with our friends at DraftKings. Right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. That is right. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if you win after betting just $5. If sports betting is unavailable in your state, you can still have lots of fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy for a shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That is promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings. All right, let's look at those sweet running backs. In our top 12, we have Saquon Barkley at the top, the number 2 in MVP odds, followed by Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon coming off of the bye, Bijan Robinson, Chase Brown, and Josh Jacobs in the top 6. And then rounding out the top 12, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane, David Montgomery, so 2 Bears in the top 10, and then Chuba Hubbard, James Conner. And then in did I say Bears? Lions. Lions. And then in our top 24, we have Brian Robinson, Alvin Kamara, Rico Dowdle, James Cook, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, and then at number 19, Zach Charbonnet, expected that he will start with Kenneth Walker, presumably out for a second straight week, and then Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Rashad White, and Tyrone Tracy. All right, we talked earlier at the top of the show about Monday Night Football, the Cowboys continually disappointing. One guy who didn't disappoint is Rico Dowdle, who has looked awesome for the past few weeks. Really looked great since he was an inactive. I believe it was in week 8. Since then, he's been the lead back for the Cowboys. Now he has a great matchup going against the Panthers. He is one of the risers in our rankings for the week. Dwayne, talk about this matchup.
Hey, I got to say, like, coaches, we defer to them. They're watching practice every day. They know so much more than we do about this game. Like, we watch the film, we study the numbers, but, we're not at practice every day, and we haven't been doing this as our life's work. But it does amaze me that things like this take so long. We're all watching the same players, and I don't need to watch practice every week to know that Rico Dowdle's been better than Ezekiel Elliott all season. So I just don't understand how these things take so long. Sincere McCormick, watching him as a Raider, how long have they had that guy buried on a practice squad running Zamir White, into a brick wall? Like, why do these things take so long? I don't know. Obviously, that tells us there are other factors at play just besides a player's play, and that's some of the stuff that we can't see. But for Rico Dowdle, yeah, man, it's a big upgrade here for him, Freedman, because if you look at the last 3 games, he's really taken over that lead role, has 70% of the snaps over that period. That is a near every down running back. An 8.1 utilization score, also really good. Still giving up some of that passing down work, not getting the 2-minute offense, not getting the long down and distance work. Those things are going to Hunter Lipke, but he's getting most of the rushing attempts. If you look at it, 72% over the last 3 games. Cowboys got a really good schedule. We've talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's really coming to fruition. We get another nice matchup here against the Panthers. That is the best matchup in the league for running backs, giving up 7.9 point fantasy boost. So That's tremendous. And even though he's not involved in the passing game, doesn't matter. 7.1 points of that boost have come through just on the ground. So the thing that Rico Dowdle gets to do is where the majority of that boost has come from. So if you take the passing away, the Panthers would still rank as the number one best matchup for running backs this week. And also just talking about the utilization comps real quick, Freedman. So I plugged it in based on what he's done over the last 3 games. I'm assuming they're going to let him finish the year in this sort of role unless, obviously an injury or something occurs. But the number of running backs that have finished as a low-end running back 1 based on the last 4 years of data that we have, 67%. So the utilization score is telling us, essentially his comps were low-end running back 1s most of the time. He's got the matchup, so I've got him as that low-end running back 1 this week. I think it all makes sense.
In any chance that we actually see Rico Dowdle keep the starting job and be the starting running back for the Cowboys next year? Is this something that you think is warranted, and might it actually happen? Or are the Cowboys destined to take a running back in the first round of the 2025 NFL draft?
Yeah, I think Jerry Jones already has Ashton Jeedy's name written on the draft slip. He's honestly just waiting to be on the clock at this point. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I do think it's a good example. Again, as much as we can look at the Saquon Barkleys and the Derrick Henrys of the world. And yes, they are better. I get it. But if you remove those names and all of a sudden start comparing numbers, you see guys like Rico Dowdle at a fraction of the cost giving you similar production. So I understand defenses don't treat them the same way. But again, it's shocking to me that Rico this year actually has been better than Saquon in terms of missed tackles forced per carry. He's tied with Saquon in terms of yards after contact per carry. And again, it's one of these things where sometimes when we're flushing through these arguments, I think we just focus on one very good running back like Saquon Barkley without maybe considering that there are 32 teams total, 31 other teams with different circumstances going on. So not trying to make this, the whole should not pay running back discussions. Moral of the story is we see Rico Dowdle honestly taking a bit of a page out of the 2004 Julius Jones handbook. Shout out to, the Golden Domer down there, but really has been coming on strong here during the second half of the season. So as Dwayne said, basically been an RB1. You guys can use Dwayne's utilization tools over at fantasylife.com like I did to find out he is the RB10 utilization score over the past 3 weeks, RB12 in PPR points per game, and the great matchup. How can you not have him ranked at least inside the top 15? Honestly, Dwayne, I feel like we're kind of being cowards here, ranking him as low as we have him, man. Let's get him in the top 10. What are we doing?
I can't believe you didn't. I was trying to leave you to do that, so then that would pull consensus up because you like to get wild and crazy like that. I am a coward. I take more of the middle ground, and then Freedman always takes the low ground. He's going to be the wet blanket to pull everyone down. He comes up with all the scenarios of how this could completely fail and ruin your bank account and your marriage, all those other things. So I try to stay between you two guys.
I mean, look, Rico Dowdle is a road underdog against the Panthers. That just, I feel like that says it all. Even though we love him, he is a road underdog
Freedman.
Against the Panthers. It still counts. Speaking of underdog, Tyrone Tracy with the Giants hosting the Ravens this week. The Giants are 16-point underdogs at DraftKings at home. Absolutely unreal stuff. That is the largest spread against a home team since the 1960s. Just absolutely unreal stuff. So Tyrone Tracy, a massive faller in our rankings this week. Dwayne, what is it that you see with this matchup that has you terrified?
What's funny is I think the line moved even more when they announced Tommy DeVito, which was funny to me because I'm like, how can you be worse than what Drew Lock has done over these last few weeks? It really can't be worse. Ian could go out there and it wouldn't be worse than what you saw from Drew Lock.
Look at the rushing yards, Dwayne.
True. And we care about that in fantasy, but the odds makers, they could care less. But if we look at Tyrone Tracy, he's really similar to Rico Dowdle over the last 4 games. If we look at just his utilization, so the workload is there. He's got a 70%. He's been over a 70% snap share in 3 of 4 games. Last week, he had a season high 84% snap share and a season high 9.6 utilization score. So they're really leaning into this guy. Yeah, he had some fumble issues a couple of weeks ago. They seem to have gotten past that. So overall, I like Tyrone Tracy. He's got a couple of hurdles, though, this weekend. One is what Freedman just talked about. Are the Giants going to score a touchdown? Are the Giants going to score? We have to pause and think about both of those questions, and that's a challenge. And then when you look at the Ravens, it's the 5th toughest matchup, holding running backs to a minus 2.1. fantasy boost on the season. So they just don't give up a lot on the ground. Tracy is a guy that can be viable in the passing game as well. So he might save you and help you still have a floor. That keeps him from becoming like a must bench guy because he is playing more on passing downs recently. And so like he might come through with 3 or 4 catches for like 25 yards. And that's enough to give you, your 5 points. Maybe you get another 50 yards rushing. You end up with 11, 12 fantasy points, right? It doesn't completely kill you, but it's just hard for me to see the upside in this scenario with Tyrone Tracy. And there is a floor lower than the one I just painted because of all the things we've talked about here. So, yeah, with Tyrone Tracy, I dropped him down to mid-range running back 3 status. But Ian, I don't think you were quite as tough on him. So you might have a little more optimism for folks with Tyrone Tracy.
I'm RB23. Pretty much, he's right there with DeAndre Swift. That's kind of the lowest ranked featured backs because everything he said about the matchup and the offensive environment is concerning. But as always, as I've learned the utilization report over the years, Dwayne, we do want to trust that usage more than anything. And as you said, man, he has more of it than just about anybody. So had a lot of good start-sit questions over on Reddit yesterday. Shout out to the fam over there, especially getting into the Fantasy Life Discord here after the show. So if you want to join that, feel free. It is a free country after all, and Discord's free, which is cool too. But yes, I would be starting Tracy ahead of the Steelers running backs, ahead of the Chiefs running backs, ahead of Sincere McCormick, and ahead of the Jaguars running backs as well. So, varying reasons for that. But at the end of the day, it is the reality that we could look up in full PPR scoring and see that Tracy has caught 7 passes for 50 or so yards. And because of this messed up scoring system that we now accept as the, rule of thumb in fantasy football, we should be benefiting from that. So we saw Rachaad White go for 29 points against this, Ravens defense, thanks to 71 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. Chase Brown had 22 points, thanks to 9 catches for 52 yards. Saquon Barkley had 19. Bucky Irving had 16. So it's not been the most, unmovable defense. That said, again, tough to get overly excited. But just remember, once you start getting to some of these wonky names, when we're talking about potential touch difference of legit 10 to 12 opportunities, you got to at some point take the volume.
All right. Well, we are going from bad to worse, and that is Tank Bigsby. I can't believe it. This is the sicko start. In the outline, I'm looking at it. It makes my stomach hurt. If we spend more than a minute and 30 seconds talking about this guy, we will have gone a minute and 31 seconds too long. Dwayne, talk to me about him.
Yeah, so in the biz, that's Freedman telling me to hurry it along so that we make our times for the show. Very nicely done, Freedman. So talking about Bigsby here. Yeah, look, if it makes you feel any better, last weekend I used ETN. And he didn't bust. I said he would give you 10 to 12 fantasy points. I think he gave you 11. So, it was fine. But what I will say is Bigsby has been the leading ball carrier in closer competitive game scripts pretty much all season for the Jaguars. We saw that continue this last weekend. He had 75% of the rushing attempts, whereas only 17% for ETN. Now, ETN got more of that passing down work. Of course, trying to figure out when the Jaguars are actually going to play a competitive game. Throw something at a dartboard. I think it's really tough. But I will say this week, it's a 4-point delta based on the spread. So that's closer than a lot of the Jags lines that we see. So I'm going to take it, Freeman. I'm going to assume that they can keep this game a little bit close. If you look at the Jets, they have not been as good down the stretch against really anything. But against the run, they've given up a 3.2 fantasy boost to opposing rushing attacks. So got a guy getting the carries in competitive game scripts. We got a matchup that's pretty decent. And again, the number one factor, since I can't use Yahoo to say is it 30% or not as far as people starting them, is does it make you feel queasy? You started off right away saying it made your stomach hurt, Freedman. So yeah, Tank Bigsby, sicko start of the week.
Look, in all fairness, I have a sicko bet of the week, which is the Jaguars as underdogs. I think they should be only 2.5-point underdogs instead of 4. See? So I guess I can't really poo-poo this too much because I'm a little bit in the same boat here. All right,
take the money line, you coward. Come on.
No,
the Jets.
No. Do it. Can't do that. Can't do it with the Jags. I can't take the money line with Mac Jones. Okay. It's not money line Jones. It's Mac Jones. Okay. All right. Moving on to the wide receivers. But first, let's talk about our friends at New Era. All right. Putting on here the Browns hat. I don't know why I chose Browns. It was the one that was right there, but that's what I'm going with. All right. stand for change with the New Era cap, the official cap of the NFL. The Inspired Change collection is part of their commitment with the NFL to break barriers and create opportunities in communities of color. With black team logos set against official team color crowns and finished with the first ever on-field pin, this collection is for the change makers. Join the movement with the official cap of the NFL, available now at New Era Cap. The NFL does not profit from the sale of Inspired Change products. Charitable contributions are awarded by the NFL Foundation directly to the NFL's Inspired Change nonprofit partners. For more information, please visit www.nfl.com/inspiredchange. All right, let's get to the wide receivers. At the top of our 24, we have, of course, Jamar Chase, who just absolutely destroyed the Cowboys on Monday Night Football, followed at number 2 by Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Mike Evans. And then rounding out the top 12, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, Cortland Sutton, Cooper Kupp, and Jawan Jennings. And then in the second half of our top 24, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, Lad McConkey, and Jacoby Myers. All right, a number of guys that we could look at for a riser, but we are going with Tyreek Hill, who had to weather the storm in the middle of the season with no Tua Tagovailoa, but over the past 4 weeks has returned to form and looking more or less like the old Tyreek Hill. Dwain, what is it that you like about him this week in his matchup against the Texans?
Yeah, and I mostly called out Tyreek Hill because of what you just showed there on the screen. He's wide receiver 28 on the season, and we've got him inside of our top 10. So I wanted to talk about him a little bit. And he has come to life over these last 4 games, averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game over that stretch. He's got wide receiver 12, 31, 11, and 5 finishes. Now, it's not due to this massive new role in the offense. In fact, his target share over this game is the same as his season. He's at a 22% target share. So it's not that they're suddenly finding new ways to feature Tyreek Hill. It really comes down to the fact that the Dolphins passing game with Tua has erupted over the last 4 games, averaging 325 yards and 2.8 passing touchdowns per contest. Obviously, that's going to come down a little bit, but you can see there's a lot of cushion there. This is an offense that historically we have expected big things from, and they've typically come through. So I feel pretty good about where they are as an offense. And I still feel good about Tyreek Hill. I prefer the 30% target share we've seen over the last 2 seasons, but that would make him, a wide receiver 1 overall, a wide receiver 2 overall. But we have seen Tyreek do really well despite not having huge target shares in the past. If you go back to his time in Kansas City, Freedman never had a target share over 23%. So right in line with where we are now. And he was typically a wide receiver. He was a wide receiver 10 every season, except for his rookie year. So I feel pretty good about the resume here. He's Tyreek Hill. I don't really need to convince you guys that much more. The last final thing, though, Texans defense. If you look at him over the last 4 games, 7.7 fantasy point boost to pass catchers. That is the 4th best mark over those last 4 games. So got the matchup, got an offense feeling hot, trying to get into the playoffs. We love Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I can't dispute anything you say. Totally agree with you. He was one of the guys I highlighted in the Freedman's Favorites article this week. Ian, you are sporting the New Era Dolphins cap. Anything to add about the Tyreek Hill enthusiasm?
Maybe I just start putting on, a different hat every single segment, depending on who we're talking about. I do like the Dolphins ones, though. I miss the helmet and, the kind of just cool guy nature of the former mascot. But yeah, anyway, Tyreek Hill. So the Dolphins offense as a whole has just been on fire ever since Tua came back. Not even the last 4 weeks, guys. We're talking about 3rd in passing yards per game, 1st in the EPA per dropback, and 5th in offensive points per game. It was just a little bit more spread out than we were used to seeing. And accordingly, Tyreek, just the wide receiver 17 during that stretch, but seems like the route rate's up there. Hopefully the wrist injury is feeling better, and accordingly you're jamming him in the lineups of all shapes and sizes because we just haven't seen that patented boom week just yet, and I think it's here. We have seen the Texans get away with it for too long, guys. I know their overall stats on defense are fine, but my God, if you have watched the secondary all season long, as well as I do that Derek Stingley Jr. is a fraud, and I will not accept him in any sort of best cornerback in the league conversation. A.D. Mitchell owns that man. If he could have gotten a good pass even once, man, the world would know. They're about to find out this Sunday. Let's go, Dolphins.
All right. Well, with every riser, there must be a faller. And this week, in his infinite wisdom, Dwain has decided that he is going to tell the world exactly why you should not start A.J. Brown in fantasy this week. Dwain, I believe the last time you bothered to say that A.J. Brown was falling down the rankings, he shoved it in your face with a typical blow-up A.J. Brown game. Why is it that you think this won't happen this week?
Yeah, so number one, I'm not saying you bench A.J. Brown. He's probably still going to be in most starting lineups, but people are frustrated with him, rightfully so. He was a guy you took in the first round or in the second round, and it just hasn't happened for him this year. What's funny is Kellen Moore comes out on Tuesday, and he's saying, hey, we're going to find more ways to make sure that basically, I guess he's in the line of sight maybe of Jalen Hurts to make him a first read and to get him more targets and all these things. The targets are not the problem. The dude ranks second in the NFL in target share at 33%. So target share is not the problem. Like when they're passing, they're throwing it to A.J. Brown. The problem is they don't pass the ball. The Eagles rank last in drop back rate over expected at -9%. And guys, that number takes the Eagles and it compares them to the last 4 years of data based on down and distance as well as the score. And what is the NFL average? So we're actually leveling the playing field for all of those different variables, and it's a -9%. Now, they're winning. So this isn't me trying to knock the Eagles and what they're doing. They're winning these football games. So, but that's led to a league low 30.8 dropbacks per game. And guess what? Jalen Hurts turns almost another 10% of those into scrambles. So it's just tough. Even if you're one of the best target earners in the NFL, which A.J. Brown clearly is, that takes someone that would normally be getting 10 to 11 targets when you're getting a 30+% target share, and it turns into 6.5. And then you look at the utilization score, that comes in at a 7.4. And if we look at his comps, it just tells the story of the range of outcomes for a player like A.J. Brown, even if they're hyper talented. Over the last 4 years, 29% of these players have been a high-end wide receiver 2, 23% have been a low-end wide receiver 2, and another 26% were high-end wide receiver 3s. So it's just it's the raw target volume issue. A.J. Brown, still a complete stud. Now, I do know as soon as I say this, A.J. Brown is complaining this week, which is why Kellen Moore had to respond. Apparently him and Jalen Hurts have some sort of beef. I don't know what all's going on with that. But guys, it's not impacting, whether or not Jalen Hurts is throwing the ball to A.J. Brown. They're going to have to pass the ball more. I would say this. It would make sense for the Eagles just to have a tune-up game, Freedman, as far as what they can do in the passing game. Because in the playoffs, you're going to run into some teams that might be able to shut that run game down, and you're going to have to know, can you turn to the passing game and win a shootout? So it would be nice to actually see that. I think it would be nice for them to go ahead and practice that run out. So as soon as I say this, that's what they're going to do this weekend. They're going to throw the ball more, and A.J. Brown is good enough to totally dominate a fantasy matchup. But look, the reality is, the utilization score tells us most of these guys are wide receiver 2s. So we just got to stop ranking him as this high end to mid range wide receiver 1. I think it's just flawed for us. So I've moved him down to borderline wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, still in most of your starting lineups. We're just readjusting expectations here. Also a pretty tough matchup against the Steelers.
All right. My wide receiver 7, your wide receiver 12. It's not disgusting enough for you to have him ranked on the borderline of wide receiver 1. Even more sick is you saying that you want to start Tank Dell over him this week. That's what I'm saying. That's what the outline says here, that you're starting Tank Dell over A.J. Brown this week. He's your sicko start going against the Dolphins. Ian, I know that you have another sicko start, and we're going to get to him. First, let's make Dwain defend why he wants to start Tank Dell over A.J. Brown this week.
Okay, number one, folks just need to go check out the Fantasy Life rankings. They will see that Freedman is a liar, that I do not have Tank Dell ahead of A.J. Brown, but he's trying to be entertaining, so I won't. It's probably not even him. It's producer Kelsey in his ear and swing. They tell him to do these sort of things, and Freedman, he'll do it. If you tell him to do it, he'll do it. But looking at Tank Dell, it has been pretty gross, guys. Nico Collins, again, the barometer here is, do I feel kind of gross when I think about putting this player in my lineup? And Tank Dell definitely passed that sniff test. Nico Collins, since he's been back since week 11, we've had Tank Dell at a 17% target share in those games, so not ideal. Only a 5.3 utilization score, averaging 7.8 fantasy points per game. If you go look at his comps from a utilization standpoint, you're not going to like it. You're going to be like, why did I draft Tank Dell? Why would I consider putting him in my lineup? There are a few things here that I like about it. Number one, the Texans have a great team total this week. It's the 8th highest, 25.3. Dell is still really good as far as the air yards go, Freedman. 39%, even since we've had Collins back. So that keeps the door open for these big plays. Average depth of target still well down the field. He's one of these guys where one catch can make your day. Now, the Dolphins' pass defense, while it has been good for the season, over the last few weeks has not been quite as salty. The 7th highest fantasy boost to opposing pass catchers at 6 points per game. So they've had to face a little bit better passing attacks, and obviously their offense pouring it on, making other teams have to throw the ball a little bit more versus when they had, all-pro not all-pro, Pro Bowler. Tyler Huntley. Sorry, Ian, I almost messed that up. If I said all-pro, that would be a real problem there. So when you look at Dell, I've got him as a boom bust wide receiver 4, but I do think he has wide receiver 2 upside, Freedman. And I think I like what Ian said earlier. I think this could be a great shootout just between the Texans and between the Dolphins. We haven't seen the Texans shoot out as often as we would want them to, but the Dolphins really could force it here.
All right. Well, Dwayne, you and I both have Tank Dell ranked at wide receiver 40, so we're kind of in the same space. Ian, if not Tank Dell, who would be your sicko start at wide receiver?
It's a guy who scored more fantasy points per game than Tank Dell and Brian Thomas Jr. and DK Metcalf since Jameis got under center in week 8. I'm talking about Elijah Moore, who maybe, guys, is going to be forced to be relied on more so as that go-to underneath target, with David Njoku being the latest player to have an unfortunate practice injury. Please, injury gods, make that hamstring okay. My bank account badly needs that. But yeah, guys, anyway, with Elijah Moore, it's been a bit of a, on-off boomer bust experience, but that's the case with Jameis Winston. And guess what, guys? If you're not first, you're last. So we want players that have the capability of booming, and that is what we have with Elijah Moore here. So maybe we do get Cedric Tillman back. But speaking of potential shootouts, guys, I do think that this Chiefs-Browns game could get up there, because if anyone is going to force Mahomes and company to get out of that comfort zone, if anyone's going to throw a couple pick sixes and not care and keep going back to the well, it is our one true king, Jameis Winston. And accordingly, I think Elijah Moore presents far more upside than your usual wide receiver 4 in the ranks. So I like Elijah Moore over Tank Dell, because I don't think we've seen any evidence this year that Tank Dell is considerably a better football player. I think the Browns passing offense has more upside, and I'm not scared of a Chiefs defense that is the 3rd worst group in EPA allowed for dropback over the last 6 weeks. So I'll take your Tank Dell sicko start and confidently say, Dwayne, that Elijah Moore is better.
Hey, I like the Elijah Moore call. I think the big challenge is if Cedric Tillman's back, that hurts.
All right. Speaking of sicko, I mean, it is that time of the show where Dwayne talks about Zach Ertz. I feel like this happens like every other or like every third show. So the sicko start at tight end is going to be Zach Ertz. That's where we're going. First, the top 12, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, Jonnu Smith, and then rounding out the top 12, TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Tucker Kraft, Sam Laporta, Zach Ertz, Cade Otton. Zach Ertz coming in at number 11. Dwayne, tell me why you are sick enough to want to continue to talk about this guy every other episode.
This is just a nostalgia shot going back to the early season. I actually had to stop using Zach Ertz like around week 7, because I looked up and I was like, I've used him as the sicko start at tight end 3 times, like out of 7 or 8 weeks, and it went well. Zach Ertz paid off 2 of those times. He did fail in one of those games. You can't be perfect, not even Zach Ertz. But whenever we look at this, I just had to talk about him one more time, Freedman. I know we're closing in on the end of the fantasy season, so I was like, I got to get my Zach Ertz props in here. So looking at him, he deserves to be here, though. The last 4 games, that's the key. 21% target share, leads the Commanders, even over Terry McLaurin over that stretch of games. If you look at his utilization score, also higher than Terry McLaurin at an 8.4. So he's a mainstay in the offense. He has been all season. We look at the Commanders, they're going to stomp the Saints. They're going to score a lot of points. So a lot of upside here for Zach Ertz, just been very involved in his offense. No one wants to really talk about it other than me, but Zach Ertz, like, he's a top 12 tight end every week, and he is again this weekend.
All right, let's get to the rankings discrepancies. We're going to start with Kyler Murray. Ian, he is your QB9. Dwayne, your QB14. Dwayne, why is it that you hate Kyler Murray this week?
Yeah, so I mean, really, there's a tier of guys here. You got Kyler Murray, you got Jared Goff, you got Jordan Love, you got Baker Mayfield. I think they're all really in the same tier. Well, Baker Mayfield has outplayed Kyler Murray all season. So I'm not going to rank Kyler Murray, ahead of him. So I've got Baker ahead of him. Jordan Love, the Packers have been running the ball more lately, and that has brought Jordan Love down a little bit. But if we look at the last 4 games, even in this run-heavy version of the Packers offense, averaging 17.4 points per game. Where's Kyler at? 15.2. Jared Goff averaging 21 fantasy points over the last 4 games. Look at him for the season. They're almost dead even. They both carry similar risks. They both are a boom bust kind of player. The big challenge for me with Kyler, of why I used to rank him consistently as a quarterback 7 to 10, it was the fact that we always knew that ground game was in play. He's not doing that. He only has a 7% design rush rate over the last 4 games. They're not using him in that way, and only a 6% scramble rate. So a lot of that goodness we know is in there for Kyler. We know he can do it. We haven't been getting it. And he's been doing better through the air. He's throwing for more yards per game, but still all year touchdowns have been a challenge for Kyler Murray in the passing game. We don't get very many multi-touchdown games from him through the air. So that just makes him really a borderline QB1 pretty much every week for me. And so I have him in a tier with all these guys. And honestly, I won't blame anyone if they want to start him over them. But I do like these guys a little bit better this week. You got Goff against a potential blow-up game against the Bills where we're shooting out back and forth. Packers, I just think, are a much better offense, and Mayfield's been better than him all season.
All right, the next big discrepancy that we have.
No, are you kidding me?
Ian gets the counter.
No.
Hey,
Kyler has
I'm trying to move it along.
Finishes this year. That is the same as Josh Allen. That's the same as Jaden Daniels. So yeah, you can take your 275 yards and 2 touchdowns from Jared Goff. I want the guy who can win your entire week with 1 scramble against the Patriots defense that just did that to Anthony Richardson, that gave up 8 touchdowns to Stafford and Tua over the 2 previous games. Kyler Murray can win your week, and I want week winners in the playoffs, Dwayne. That's all.
Okay. All right, the next one. DK Metcalf. Since I know Dwayne is going to talk 2 minutes, I'm just going to be really quick. DK Metcalf getting healthy, going against a super injured Packers secondary. Jai Alexander, I still expect to be out. So DK Metcalf, I'm keeping the faith. He's still running more routes, getting more targets than Jackson Smith and Jigba. Eventually, I think that turns into some production. I could see it happening this week against the Packers. Dwayne, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, you're really high on him. You got him wide receiver 16. I'm at wide receiver 30. So we are like really far apart. My gut says like it's probably somewhere in the middle of where we both are. Like I have Metcalf ahead of some guys that like I'll probably move him above, once I make my final adjustments in the ranks. He has been battling the shoulder injury. I think that's part of it. Also, the arrival of JSN in the offense as someone that can challenge him for targets. I think that's been another issue. Tyler Lockett falling off, like it helps a little bit. He's got a 24% target share over the last 4 games, dealing with a shoulder injury. It might just be a health thing. So I'm not completely out on DK Metcalf. Probably need to have him more around like that Calvin Ridley range, who I've got at wide receiver 23 right now. Right now, I've got Metcalf behind Jamison Williams. I would start DK. Like he's in a pass-first offense. He's one of the top 2 weapons. I've got him behind DJ Moore, who's been really good over these last 3 to 4 games. But we know that Caleb Williams he can be all over the place. So I think there's an argument to move, Metcalf probably more to that borderline wide receiver 2. But he hasn't been that good over the last 4 games. So that's a bit of why I've been lower on him.
All right, one more here. Terry McLaurin. Ian, you have him at wide receiver 8. Dwayne, wide receiver 18. Ian, you go first. Why is it that you love the McLaurin this week?
I don't know. I think having 98 yards or a touchdown in 10 of your last 11 games is pretty good. I'm not Dwayne. I don't have his hair. I don't have Terry McLaurin ranked, as a wide receiver 20 either, though. So you guys tell me. I will say, when we look at guys like Tyreek, AJB, CD, Kupp, Calvin Ridley, people that we will see ahead of Terry McLaurin's in some ranks, not in mine, rest assured. I don't get it. They haven't been as consistent. I think they are all very good at football, so we're not looking at a talent discrepancy. I trust Jaden Daniels, and I don't trust the New Orleans Saints defense. That has not been a group to worry about basically all season long, especially not since they literally traded their best cornerback to Washington. So don't even have to worry about the weather inside the sweet, fantasy-friendly, the Coors Field, Freedman confines of the Superdome. Maybe not quite the same shootout potential these days. But yeah, Terry McLaurin, he's pretty much been a wide receiver 1 all season. I'm not trying to stop now.
Dwayne, what do you like about that?
He's got 3 wide receiver 1 finishes on the whole year. I like Terry McLaurin. I mean, his utilization score tells us like he's a mid-range to low-end wide receiver 2. That's where I put him every week. Like he's just in a range of guys there. I definitely don't think he's a wide receiver one on a slate where we've got everyone. Where we have I'm using the utilization score, man. Which one's more predictive? Fantasy points or utilization score?
What do we get fantasy points for? Oh my God.
Which thing is more predictive for future fantasy points?
Do we win fantasy matchups with utilization score or fantasy points? Yeah.
Do we win fantasy matchups by predicting who's going to score more fantasy points in the future? Yes, to answer your question.
He's a wide receiver one. That's just what's happened this year.
I'm glad we got that solved. That's going to do it for the Week 15 Fantasy Life Rankings episode. For Ian and Dwayne, I'm Matt Freedman. And remember, it's not a fantasy if you believe it.